Through the centuries, some people have argued that God wanted the fall, that it was his intention for humans to descend into sin and death, and thus lead him, in the person of Jesus, to the cross. After all, how else could he have so powerfully and graphically displayed the depth of his love for humanity than by dying on the cross for them? In short, the thinking goes, God needed humanity to fall. That is a horrible and wretched position to take. It was never God's intention for either Satan or humanity to fall. The rebellion of Satan and then of humanity was a tragedy of immense consequence, and our joy in him would have remained complete had our first parents not fallen. The Garden of Eden was the first classroom for humanity, where Adam and Eve learned directly from God through their environment and his instruction. According to Ellen G. White, this divine education aimed to reveal the wonders of creation and the Creator himself. In Genesis 2:16-17, we see the first command God gave humanity, a prohibition not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This was not a denial of wisdom, but a protection from harmful knowledge that would bring suffering and death. God intended to teach humanity in ways that would not lead to pain. This concept becomes clearer later in Israel's history. When the people chose to reject God's direct leadership and requested a human king, God granted their request, but warned of the consequences. As Israel's kings became corrupt, the people strayed further from their purpose, embracing worldliness and disobedience to God's commandments. This history sets the stage for the book of Daniel, which illustrates the failure of both Gentile nations and Israel through the rise and fall of kingdoms. The centuries of oppression that followed became a new classroom, where the contrast between earthly rule and God's kingdom became painfully clear. Ultimately, the Edenic prohibition reminds us that not all knowledge is beneficial. Some things, though alluring, lead to spiritual and physical harm. True wisdom is found in trusting God's guidance, not in seeking forbidden paths. As centuries passed and Israel found itself captive in Babylon, God once again revealed his guidance, this time through the prophet Daniel. In the royal courts of a foreign land, Daniel interpreted a dream that would outline the course of human history. In Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar saw a towering statue made of various metals: gold, silver, bronze, iron, and finally, iron mixed with clay. Each section represented a different empire, beginning with Babylon and followed by Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and the fragmented nations that would come after. At the end of the vision, a rock, unhewn by human hands, struck the statue, shattering it, and grew to fill the whole earth. This rock symbolizes God's eternal kingdom, destined to outlast and replace every earthly power. The prophecy carries profound lessons. It reminds us that earthly kingdoms, no matter how glorious, are temporary and decline in both moral and spiritual value. Human progress, especially in technology and innovation, has not solved the deeper issues of violence and injustice. The 20th century alone witnessed both astonishing advancements and unprecedented destruction, highlighting the limits of human wisdom and the dangers of relying solely on our own understanding. While thinkers like Darwin and Marx envisioned a world moving ever upward, history and prophecy reveal a different story, a downward spiral away from God's original design. Even so, Jesus foretold that the world would experience turmoil, wars, famines, and disasters, not as reasons for fear, but as signs that God's plan is unfolding. In a world filled with uncertainty, Daniel 2 offers hope. History is not random and God remains in control. His kingdom, a kingdom of peace, justice, and restoration, will ultimately prevail, bringing to fulfillment the promise given from the very beginning. As history unfolds, Daniel receives yet another vision, one that echoes the message of Daniel 2 but from a strikingly different vantage point. In Daniel chapter 7, the prophet is no longer interpreting a dream for a king. Instead, he sees with God's eyes. The image is not a grand statue, but 4 wild beasts emerging from a churning, stormy sea, a powerful symbol of the chaos and violence that marked the rise of world empires. Throughout Scripture, the tumultuous sea often represents the instability and unrest of the nations, places where conflict and disorder reign. The beasts Daniel sees are not just animals, they are empires, rising and falling through strife and oppression. Unlike the fleeting peace once found in the Promised Land, these kingdoms are defined by instability, injustice, and the suffering of those caught beneath their rule. Daniel witnesses these beasts drawing near to the land, symbolically encroaching on the territory once set apart for God's people. It's a vivid picture of what happens when divine leadership is traded for human ambition. A tragic shift that would continue until Christ's return and the establishment of God's everlasting kingdom. This vision is not just about ancient history. Romans chapter 3 describes the universal problem. There is none righteous, no, not one. All are under the power of sin. Violence, deception, and rebellion are woven into the fabric of humanity. The law, Paul writes, exposes our guilt and silences every excuse, revealing just how deeply we need the gospel. Daniel 7 reminds us that no earthly system, no matter how powerful or promising, can bring the justice and peace our hearts long for. Our hope is not found in politics or empires, but in the coming of Christ. Only He can heal what is broken, restore what has been lost, and establish a kingdom that will never end. Throughout Bible prophecy, the imagery of land and sea is used to paint a powerful contrast. The sea, restless and unpredictable, symbolizes chaos, instability, and the surging ambitions of the nations. It is a picture of humanity's striving, where power ebbs and flows like storm-tossed waves. In contrast, the land stands for stability and order, often representing God's people or a place of divine refuge. This symbolic interplay comes to life in the book of Revelation. In chapter 12, the dragon, Satan, unleashes a flood of water, a symbol of multitudes and corrupt worldly powers, in an attempt to destroy the woman, who represents God's faithful church. Yet the earth helps the woman, absorbing the flood and providing protection. Seventh-day Adventists see in this prophecy a reference to the migration of persecuted Christians to the New World. America, depicted as the earth, became a place of refuge, a modern promised land where those fleeing religious oppression could find shelter and the freedom to worship. But the prophecy holds a sobering twist. Revelation 13 describes a beast rising from the earth. At first it is gentle, lamb-like, reflecting the nation's founding ideals of liberty and freedom. Yet in time this same beast speaks like a dragon. The land that once protected religious liberty becomes an agent of religious oppression, repeating the tragic human pattern of turning away from God's law to govern by its own flawed standards. This prophetic warning echoes down through history. Even the most promising human systems, when separated from God's rule, inevitably descend into corruption and coercion. The contrast between land and sea is not just about geography. It is a call to remember where true refuge and freedom are found. Revelation chapter 10 paints a vivid scene. The birth of a movement destined to change the world. Here, a mighty angel descends from heaven, standing with one foot on the sea and one on the land. In his hand he holds a little book now open, widely understood to be the book of Daniel, sealed for centuries but now unlocked in the last days. This dramatic stance, bridging both land and sea, signals the global reach of the message. It is for every nation, tribe, and language, for both the old world and the new. The angel's thunderous cry echoes the three angels' messages of Revelation 14, calling all humanity to prepare for Christ's soon return. In the prophetic timeline, this moment marks the divine commissioning of the Remnant Church. Born in a land of newfound religious liberty, America, this movement took root where freedom allowed the Millerite revival and later, the rise of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Its mission? To proclaim the everlasting gospel and the truths of prophecy to the ends of the earth, just as Jesus foretold in Matthew 24:14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Daniel chapters 2 and 7 provide the foundation for this hope. These prophecies, remarkably accurate, trace the rise and fall of empires: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, culminating in a final, eternal kingdom. In Daniel 2, a stone cut without hands shatters the statue of worldly powers, becoming a mountain that fills the earth. This is God's kingdom, unstoppable, unshakable, and everlasting. In these time-tested prophecies we find confidence. They remind us that history is not random but guided by a loving God who promises a perfect kingdom, where sin, suffering, and death will be no more. The call is clear: prophesy again, share the hope, prepare the world for the return of the King.